Fire Away tackles burning questions and hot topics in Canadian employment law, human resources, and dispute resolution. Hosted by Rudner Law, Fire Away is your go-to source for legal insight on the world of work. So whether you are an employee or an employer, a lawyer or an HR pro, let's ignite the conversation and get into today's episode. Here's your host, employment lawyer, mediator, and founder of Rudner Law, Stuart Rudner.
Welcome to Season 7, Episode 9 of Fire Away. I'm very happy to have Nadia Zaman joining me as my co-host. Most of you already know Nadia as a senior associate at Rudner Law. She's also the mother of an adorable little guy who's now 6. And over the last 6 years, I've watched Nadia, like many people, trying to balance work and time with her family. And I've watched her excel at both being an employment lawyer and a mother. And Nadia had the great idea for our topic today, and also a great idea for a guest to come and join us to talk about moms at work and employment laws and how they impact on the balance between family life and work life, and what employers and employees need to be aware of when you're dealing with parents at work, and in particular moms at work. So Nadia, and I should say, I know Nadia is struggling with having lost her voice, so hopefully it's going to keep up for the next half hour. So Nadia, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the topic and our guest for today.
Thanks, Stuart. So this is probably a metaphor for moms at work because we get things done, and I'm sure Allison's going to agree with that. We're excited to have Allison join us here today. Allison is an HR professional, career coach, and founder of Moms at Work, Canada's largest community for working mothers. We can't wait to talk about career and community building, as well as how employment law factors in. So let's get into it. Welcome to the show, Allison.
Thanks for having me.
So to start things off, tell us a bit about your background and then how you came to start Moms at Work.
Sure. So my background has been in HR. I started my HR career in the early 2000s, which ages me drastically. Wonderful. Early 2000s. My specialties were always around leaves and disability management. So I spent a great deal of time navigating EI, parental leaves, short-term, long-term disability for employers of every size. So I worked in healthcare, manufacturing, tech, Coke, Lowe's, Aramark, you name it. I was working with a lot of different types of companies. Moms at Work wasn't supposed to happen. I loved my job. I was really happy there. And in 2015, I suffered a traumatic brain injury. So I got to be on the other side of the case management. So I was off work for almost 3 years. So I developed a seizure disorder and lost the use of parts of the left side of my body. And they told me, as I'm sure you've seen anything, that I wouldn't be able to work anymore. So I had to move from someone who had those conversations with other people to having those conversations with myself. Unfortunately, that wasn't anything that I really wanted to do. So I reached back out to employers that I had worked with and asked if, they wanted some support in HR. They all said yes. And so I started that way and ended up coaching mostly women, and all my clients ended up being mothers. And soon I realized, I'm like, oh, actually, you don't need me, you need each other. And that's how Moms at Work started, actually as a really small Facebook group, and then ballooned into Canada's largest advocacy group for moms.
That's an incredible story. Thanks for sharing that with us. And I think it speaks a lot to the importance of community building, especially for moms at work. A lot of times, people who are going through it, they think that they're on their own or that they're dealing with it themselves, but having that community is extremely helpful. So what are some of the biggest obstacles that you've seen for working mothers in today's workplaces?
So I know there's a lot of talk about remote work and back to office mandates. I'm like, for most of our community, that's not the case. They never were able to work remotely. So women predominantly, fill the caregiving roles, nurses, teachers, doctors, ECEs, which during COVID were just, put at the front line of everything. So really, in terms of what we talk about at Moms at Work, is we really focus on legislative changes. So things that employers are required to do, pay transparency, pay equity. It's pretty timely. Claudia Golden, who is a professor at Harvard, won the Nobel Prize in economics, and her topic was the motherhood penalty. So I'm like, if that's what's happening in 2023, then we know that this is the problem. So Moms at Work focuses really on legislation. We talk a lot a bit about flexibility, which is something that any employer can implement, whether they're in person or online. We try and move away from this sort of divide of people who can work from home and people who can't, because it creates this sort of division. And Moms at Work represents almost 40,000 women across Canada. So we're really, really fixated on how we can support all mothers in our advocacy work. And that includes things like $10 a day childcare. So it's not even just about work. It's about like creating like you said, a community and how we can support them even outside of work.
I saw on your website there was something about salary negotiations, and I know that comes into play with the whole pay transparency discussion. Is that something that's a big part of what you do?
It is. We talk a lot about money. Women are told that it's rude to talk about money. And so we're pushing that boundary in every way, shape, and form. So Moms at Work was heavily involved in passing pay transparency in BC and Ontario. We have partners in the US. Women are taught that it's rude to talk about money and that it's rude to ask. So right now, we've always talked about negotiation, and that's with salary and within everyday life. Like whether you're buying a car or whether you're buying a couch or whether you're, buying 150 whatever for your kid's soccer team. I'm like, there's ways to negotiate that. But yes, we encourage women to ask about money, to ask what the salary is, and we help them learn to negotiate, which many people said is the first time in their career that they negotiated. And some of these women had been working for 15 years. So that's a lot.
So I'm curious, when you say you help people negotiate, so how, like, practically speaking, how do you actually help them do it?
So we do trainings. So we do a lot of webinars and teaching. We have one-on-one coaching, and it's really about looking at, our team has, extensive knowledge about salary bands, and we've all worked in HR, so we understand how they work. But essentially we do training and we teach people first about the wage gap, second part about like the ways in which to do it. And the thing I always say is, I'm like, I was in HR for years. I used to do dozens of these a day. And I'm like, and at not one point did I go home and say, oh my gosh, that horrible woman asked for more money. I'm like, it's not my money. I don't care. Right. Like I just negotiate and I go home and I go to bed and I move on with my life. And a lot of people feel like they're like, I'm taking it personally. So we're trying to depersonalize the fact that like, this is an exchange for time and money. You're going to work for a paycheck, right? They're not your family. You're not like in a partnership. This is your employer. So we need to have real talks about money, and negotiations part of that.
And we see, as employment lawyers, we see it from the other side of things when we are reviewing employment contracts before someone's starting their job. And a lot of times people are very reluctant to ask for changes in the contract, whether it's about compensation or about something else. So even if they know that, they're signing away certain rights or that they can ask for more, we do regularly see people being reluctant because they're worried, what if the employer pulls the offer off the table? Or what if the employer gets upset for whatever reason before they even start working there? And I think that's a common thing, especially what you said about, women being taught that asking for money is rude or that you shouldn't be asking for that. I think there's enough research out there about the sort of social conditioning that happens throughout childhood to adulthood for women in terms of what can be asked for, what shouldn't be asked for.
Right. And I think it's more than that. It affects women. Women live longer. So you make less money, you have less retirement earnings. Right. So for me, it's deeply personal. So I see all these people around me who think that, and I'll say, I can probably count the number of times. I've been doing this for 20 years. You both have been, practicing for a long time. Employers rarely pull offers. Like, unless you do something like pretty outrageous, they're not pulling offers. Like, I've already put this through legal. I've already spent, 20 hours interviewing you. I've already put it together. I'm like, it takes a lot for us to pull an offer. And I can say honestly, I'm like, I've never, pulled an offer for someone reasonably negotiating. But what we saw is we work with lots of employment lawyers. I'm like, employment lawyers can support you, and you can talk about this on, the things that you're changing, the legal complexities of your offer. But they can't tell you whether or not to negotiate or what you should, like the amount you should be asking for. That's sort of like moving a little bit out of depth. And our goal with pay transparency came from the fact that, like, I came up through unions. Everybody knew what everybody else made. You want to know how much somebody makes, you open the collective agreement and find out. And when I moved into corporate, they said to me, they were like, well, but like, don't mention the salary when you talk to them. I was like, why? That's stupid. Like, why would I not ask them? Like, what if it's too little money? Then I don't want to waste their time and I don't want to waste my time. So, I saw that come over, and it was a very, very weird jump. And I think that, like, that's a very easy thing. Like, I don't go and buy a car if I don't know how much it costs. I don't buy carrots if I don't know how much it costs, right? Like, I want to know how much I'm going to get paid. And that's, something we've pushed really hard for.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly though. Like, as long as someone is negotiating reasonably, then yeah, like I've been doing this 25 years. I've rarely seen offers pulled unless there's a whole bunch of completely unreasonable demands. But especially if you're someone who's in demand and you have a strong skill set, then yeah, like I agree with everything you said. I mean, there are a lot of people who are scared to negotiate, but it does tend to be more so with women who have been taught that you don't. So, and a lot of them just undervalue themselves. So I think you said it perfectly. As long as you're reasonable.
Well, and I'm going to jump on this and say, like, I tell people the worst thing that's going to happen, usually, like, except for those, at random times. And I'm sure both you and me have had the experience where someone came and asked for the moon. I'm like, that's not happening. And also now I question your judgment seriously. But the worst thing that's going to happen is they say no. Or they come back and say, you know what, we can't meet you there, but that's fine. It's okay for people to say no, right? But this is a partnership. Like, you entering an agreement with an employer is a partnership. So it has to work for both of you. But, if both me and you have seen very few examples of it, I just want people to understand how very rare it is for us to pull offers unless you're being really unreasonable. And asking for a few $1,000s extra, I don't count as unreasonable.
Yeah, and I know Nadia has seen the same thing. Like, whether it's asking for a bit more money or more vacation time, especially I find for moms, it's often not the money so much; it's the vacation time or things like that, or the flexibility. So all those things, as long as you're not being completely ridiculous, if they want you, they're not going to pull the offer.
No, and from an HR standpoint, like, asking to see a benefits booklet, asking for more details about those things, like, that's not anything that we can't do. Usually we're just so used to flinging out offers, right? Like, working at a hospital, I personally hired like 600 people a year. I'm just so used to going through the motions and doing it that I'm not upset if you say, hey, can I see a copy of the pension plan that I'm signing up for? Hey, can I have a booklet? It's like, yeah, absolutely have that. It's just we hadn't put it together. So yeah.
And this applies even during the course of the employment where, there might be more responsibilities added onto someone's plate, but maybe they are reluctant to ask for a raise. Maybe the employer is not providing it on their own. But a lot of times these people have a lot of leverage. The employer actually wants them there. That's one of the reasons why more responsibilities are provided, and that salary negotiation can actually come in very handy at that time because there is more reliance on the individual. How often would you say the salary negotiation comes up for your training during the course of the employment as compared to at the outset?
All the time, or at least it should. If someone's handing you more a title or increased responsibilities, it means you're good at your job. It means that you're valuable. It is incredibly difficult to replace top talent. So it's hard to replace, employees anyway. It costs us tens of thousands of dollars. But for someone who is a top employee and we're giving extra responsibility, I'm like, and I will say this, as someone who is keeping an eye on potential leadership, I expect you to. if you can't negotiate for yourself, then you can't negotiate for your team. You can't stand up for like if you're moving into that. So I really watch for those things in terms of leadership development is what are you asking for? How are you approaching it? Tell me, what you need and how to do it. And I expect you to do the same thing for your team. So, for me, seeing people negotiate just shows me that you're going to be able to negotiate for us as an employer as well. Like these are the people we're sending out to negotiate, to bring us in more sales. I expect them to be doing that at a certain level.
And that's a great point. What I often say to my clients is that negotiating for yourself or advocating for yourself in whatever shape or form, that's usually a green flag as opposed to a red flag for employers. Because usually that comes in handy, as you said, in their role or how they manage their team, if they are managing a team. And it comes up all the time.
Right. And I'm going to add that people, this is the shout out for employment lawyers. If you get a new offer during the course of your employment, you should also have that reviewed. People make mistakes. They put in I've seen all sorts of weird things get entered into it that can nullify previous agreements. Oftentimes people will get something if it's a new job reviewed, but I am advocating that people should get like any increases. If you're getting a new contract internally, you should also get it reviewed by an employment lawyer because the employer sure as heck have.
That's like music to our ears because we're always telling our clients and others about getting contracts reviewed, not just at the outset, but also during the course of your employment if you get a new agreement, because a lot of times it is limiting your rights, or not even a lot of times, the majority of the time, it is limiting your rights and entitlements, especially for long service employees. But because usually it comes with a promotion and a raise or something that's of a greater benefit, they sort of take it up as opposed to seeking legal advice and having it reviewed by an employment lawyer. So that's actually really good.
I was curious, and I was not to the words out of my mouth. I was about to say the exact same thing. I was going to say you're preaching to the choir, but same thing. It's just so critical. But Allison, I was curious because I know you're talking about some of the obstacles now in 2024, almost 2025. How would you say that things have changed over the last, let's say, 20 years?
I think that, we've had a lot of luck in that our current, and really that, our current federal government has been truly a feminist government in that they're pushing, healthcare, they're pushing $10 a day childcare. We worked with them to lower the EI amounts for pregnant women during COVID, because the first thing I saw when COVID came out was like, oh my gosh, they're going to lay off all these people and they're not going to get their maternity leave. They're not going to have enough hours. They're going to get laid off. And a whole bunch of people are going to be out a very large amount of money because they're not going to be able to do it, which we did. We dropped it like 225 hours. But I think that the awareness piece was missing. So every person who comes to Moms at Work had the same opinion I did. So before I had kids, I remember asking someone, I'm super pregnant, asked someone in my office, I said, well, I'm figuring out what I want to do on maternity leave, and I think I'm going to write a book. And I think it took everything in her power not to fall off her chair laughing. And thank goodness that she didn't. But when I came back to her, when my baby was 3 months, she was like, how's the book coming? I was like, aren't you spectacular? So there's this sort of feeling that it's never going to be me. We have done so many things about the number of women who are laid off while pregnant or on maternity leave, and within 6 months of coming back, that we've actually negotiated free legal consults for people because it's so prevalent. So I would say that I haven't seen much of a change in that. And so you can probably talk to this. Legally, you can't fire someone because they're pregnant. That doesn't mean that you can't be terminated while you're pregnant. And that causes a lot of anxiety for people telling their employer that they're having a baby or all the things. And I'm like, and I feel like it's for good reason, but I don't see much of that has changed in the last 20 years.
Oh, that's actually really disappointing to hear. And I was going to say somewhat of the opposite, in my view, and especially in the legal profession, I think things have improved quite a bit. I mean, I know when I was a fairly junior associate, there's certainly no parental leave for dads, but also just for the women, you could take your leave, but you did so knowing you were going to delay your career progression. if you did. So I think things have gotten better, but I think you see a lot more of the practical side than we do. You also made a really important point, which we often make, which is that you're right. You can't be let go because you're pregnant or because you take a parental leave, but you can be let go while you are pregnant or while you're on
Yep.
leave, as long as it's completely unrelated. That's one of the rare areas where I think employers underestimate their rights. There is this
Right.
common perception out there that, oh, well, they're pregnant, so we can't let her go, even though we've just closed her entire department. So there's a lot. It's just, it goes along with everything else that we always say, and I know Nadia says it as often as I do, that people just don't treat their employment relationships as legal relationships. They don't take the time to understand how the laws work. And the example you gave is a perfect one, but it's also true that we've seen people who say, well, I was off on parental leave, I came back, and 3 months later I was let go, so I guess I don't really have any, or don't really have a leg to stand on. And in many cases you do.
Yeah. And I will say, I was like, the things that we see at Moms at Work are very different than the things that I saw as an employer. Because when you get the stories coming from 40,000 people about the things that were said, the emails that were sent, the agreements they were forced to sign, the NDAs they were forced to sign, like it makes me so angry that I have thought, like this is my life's work, right? The same way that this is your life's work. I'm like, Moms at Work. I'm like, these are my people. I'm fighting for people who are like, very much in very vulnerable situations, right? When you have little kids, like you need work. Like work is not, a thing that's a luxury. It's like you need to put food on the table. When you have kids, that becomes even more profound. So I will also say my expectations for what Moms at Work can accomplish is like up here, like way above the screen up here. So I'm not going to be happy that we almost have a $10 child care thing. I'm not going to be happy that we like have some improvements in EI. I'm like, I want more. And I think that, I don't have kids in daycare. I think that it's so important for people to look back and pull people up behind them, because when my kids were in daycare, I was in no position to be fighting for $10 a day
Mhm.
childcare. I was exhausted. And so I look around and I say, okay, great. Well, I'm not going to let you flounder. Just because I didn't have $10 a day childcare doesn't mean that you shouldn't. And so that's part of Moms at Work. But the stuff that we deal with is heavy and very disappointing. And I think that it's just because I see so much of it that it's hard for me to be like, yay, like we're doing a little bit better, or that my husband can take 6 weeks of leave. Like I want more. And I think that that's what comes out in Moms at Work messaging is I'm like, I want more. Because women deserve to be paid the same. And I think that will help so many things.
And I think a lot of times what ends up happening is that the discrimination once an employee returns to work from maternity leave or parental leave is not overt as much as it was before. However, there's a lot of subtle discrimination that happens. And because discrimination is so difficult to prove, it becomes even more difficult for the women to then take a stance against their employer, because it's not really overt, it's very subtle, and it's not easy to prove. So for example, some of the things that I found out before I went on maternity leave, I talked to many women lawyers who had gone on maternity leave. And I mean, this was back in 2018, so it was a while ago. But every single person that I spoke with told me in confidence that they experienced some level of discrimination, whether it's through, files changing, like the type of files that they were getting, or, the way that they were being treated once they returned, or as they were sort of nearing the end of their leave. And I was actually shocked because I had never sort of had that conversation with these women one-on-one before about this specific issue. And mostly people don't want to talk about it openly because they also want to maintain their job and they want to have that career growth as well. So I think that a lot of it is very subtle and makes it actually even more difficult for a lot of women in a way.
Yeah. And Moms at Work did, honestly, we did the first survey about women's experiences on returning to work. And I'm like, I was a return to work professional, right? I helped people get back to work. And, we interviewed almost 2,000 women, and 4 in 10 said they experienced discrimination while pregnant or on maternity leave or within 6 months, which I was like, 4 in 10? At first I was like, and I'm like, no, that's about right. But I will say at Moms at Work, I'm like, the discrimination that we see come in is blatant. It is in emails, in text messages. So a lot of like white collar jobs, you don't see this. There's more awareness of employment laws. There's more, understanding of what their things are. But I was a return to work specialist, and someone who worked with me told me when I was pregnant with my second, they're like, "Wow, that's a career killer." And I was like, "Cool. So you said that out loud. That's a thing." I'm like, this wasn't, in 1955. This was in 2013. And I will say that most working mothers have some sort of tale to tell about something said in the lunchroom, something said in whatever. Like, my boss was a nurse and kept asking me if I was having twins because I had gained so much weight. I'm like, she said it about 20 times. I had to ask her to stop. So I'm like, there's all sorts of things that are completely inappropriate and that people suck up because they're like, I need this job. I can't have this done. And also, as you may see, I'm like, so a lot of people think I can't afford a lawyer. I'm not going to get anything out of it. I have to fight a major company and I will lose. And so that's what we see on that side. And I haven't seen a ton of change. The stories are still pretty garbage.
Which is why it's great that you're oh, sorry, Nadia. I was going to jump in because we do need to wrap things up, but if you want to finish your thought, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask, do you find that a lot of these, in a lot of these situations, there's reluctance to ask for accommodation for fear of how they're going to be treated as a result?
Accommodation, I think, is dealt very differently at large companies. So the majority of Canadians are, small, like work for small business owners who like don't even get their timesheets right half the time. So coming to someone who runs a restaurant and saying, "Hey, can I start my shift later?" And they're like, "No, we open at 7. That's it." Like, so not only are, the employees not aware, employers are often not aware of this. I don't see this the same amount in sort of like white collar jobs, hospital, and then places like hospitals, teachers, unions, banks, whatever, because everybody's sort of more aware of accommodation and your right to accommodation. Where we see it all fall apart is, like minimum wage jobs, places that people don't have any, sick leave or, any sort of benefits. People are very rightfully afraid to ask because their employers are not familiar with their obligations.
Yeah. As we predicted before the show, the time just flies by. So normally at this point, I would take my turn to fire away. I think we're just going to skip that this month because we obviously have a lot more we could cover, and even the stuff we did took up more time than we planned. So I think we'll wrap things up. But Allison, I really want to thank you for joining us, and Nadia for making the suggestion and for guiding the discussion. So, Allison, before I wrap things up, what's the best way for people to find you or reach out to Moms at Work?
So Moms at Work is on LinkedIn, very busy on LinkedIn. So you can find us at Moms at Work, LinkedIn. And then on Instagram, we're at This Is Moms at Work. And Facebook, we have over 20,000 people in our Facebook group, and that's Moms at Work as well.
That's amazing. Well, thank you again for doing this. And that's a wrap for season 7, episode 9 of Fire Away. So our next episode, we're coming up to the end of the year. Our next episode is going to be on November 19th. We're going to be joined by Alex Gonzalez of Rippling for a discussion on corporate credit cards and business expense fraud. So that should be an interesting one. Looking forward to that. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Thank you to Allison Venditti for joining me today and joining Nadia. And again, Nadia, thanks for having the idea and then implementing this. As always, thanks to Rob, Rebecca, and Mark for helping put the show together. And to quote one of my favorite hockey broadcasters, the pleasure was all ours.
At Rudner Law, we want people to treat their employment relationships as legal relationships and make informed decisions rather than assumptions. Keep up to date on Canadian employment law issues by following us on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok, liking our Facebook page, subscribing to our YouTube channel, and signing up for our newsletter. Past episodes can be found on YouTube, on our website, and archived on Facebook. And if you like our page or subscribe to our channel, you will receive notifications when the episodes are live. As we always say, none of that replaces legal advice tailored to your specific circumstances. If you think you might need an employment lawyer, you probably do. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us.